Das, my grandmother's house. It's a very short poem. You won't find much difficulty in understanding the poem. And as in the earlier poem, as we had discussed, this poem is also autobiographical, a confessional poem, but much shorter than introduction. Here, the poet is in a very nostalgic mood. The poet is trying to remember her own grandmother's house, and what are the feelings associated with that house, uh, and what she misses in that house. The comparison between her grandmother's house and the kind of life that she is leading now. These are some of the main issues that are dealt with in the poem. So let's begin the poem. My Grandmother's House by Kamla Das. The poem goes like this. There is a house now far away where once I received love. Written in the past tense. That woman died. The house withdrew into silence. Snakes moved among books. I was then too young to read, and my blood turned cold like the moon. How often I think of going there, to peer through blind eyes of windows, or just listen to the frozen air, or in wild despair, pick an armful of darkness to bring it here, to lie behind my bedroom door like a brooding dog. You cannot believe, darling, can you, that I lived in such a house and was proud and loved. I, who have lost my way and beg now at strangers' doors to receive love, at least in small change. So, the poem, as I read the poem, you must have already understood. She is referring to the house of her grandmother, that house where she has received a lot of love. But the woman, that is the grandmother, she has long been dead, and the house itself has withdrawn into silence. And she has often thought about going back to that house to bring back the love that she had received there. So, a little bit about the poem. So, this poem appeared again in the same anthology that where introduction had appeared. The anthology titled Summer in Calcutta. It was published in 1965. The poet here recalls with nostalgia her grandmother's house because she spent a very beautiful childhood there where she received love, and she was loved, and she was loved without any condition, and she lived with a lot of dignity there. So this is something that she misses in her true life, in her real life. And there is a pervading emotion of sadness, of pessimism in the poem. So this sadness is all throughout there in the poem. A sense of pessimism is there in the poem, and it suggests that the poet is actually not at all happy about her present status. And what is her present status? A married life. And not only a married life, a loveless married life, because she is in a marriage where there is no love at all. So that is something that the poet is uh, lamenting about. Okay, so here the poet says that she is now recalling the days that she spent with her grandmother, and it was a time of love, and that is the place where she received love. In fact, that is the only place where she received love, at least till the time of writing this poem. Poem is autobiographical and confessional in nature because the poet is talking about her own experiences in her grandmother's house, her own experiences, not very happy experiences, unhappy experiences, as she is uh, in the in a tied down in a loveless marriage. Okay, so the poem, the death of her grandmother, it seemed to her, brought about a eerie silence to the house itself. Even the house seems to have withdrawn into silence because of the death of her grandmother. Because it seems that the only life of that house was her grandmother. And now it is again filled with grief because grandmother is no more, the house is again filled with grief. And when she looks back with nostalgia, she remembers that the books that were there, she felt as if the books were cold and distant and the books were full of snakes. Because she was too young to read those books, she did not understand what was in those books. She felt as if the books were also crawling with snakes because she felt that with the death of her grandmother, the books have also become cold and distant, as if snakes were crawling among them. Then she uses a very beautiful imagery. My blood turned cold like a moon, like the moon. Now, the moon is supposedly a cold, see, even the light of the moon is very cold and not very harsh. So, moon gives the impression of something very cold. So, she feels that with the death of her grandmother, there was a lack of warmth and happiness in her life. And this lack of warmth and happiness continued with from the death of her grandmother. It continued to her present day life. So she wanted to go back to that house again and to peer through the windows, just to see through the windows, to peep through the windows, but with a blind eye. Why a blind eye? Because there's nobody there. Just as a blind man would look towards inside a house and find nothing there. Similarly, she would also look into the house and she would find nobody there because her grandmother is dead and the house has become neglected and uh, almost dilapidated. So there was no longer anyone living in the house, and even she felt that even the air around it is frozen in time. So she felt that there is darkness all around, but even though the darkness is something that people are afraid of, darkness is something that people do not like, she felt that this particular darkness, the darkness all around it, can give her some comfort because she was in a sense of despair and she wanted some love, some comfort in her life. And she felt that even the darkness of her grandmother's house can give her some comfort and some solace. So she wanted to bring the darkness into her life, and she felt that if she could bring the darkness, an armful of darkness, back into her present life, then she would be happier. She would at least have a sense of love that her grandmother used to give her. In the next part, she says that just like a brooding dog, a dog which sits there without talking, without barking, without moving, brooding dog, she felt that that the darkness will be her companion, like a brooding dog behind her, sitting behind her bedroom door. Then in the next few lines, she addresses somebody as darling, and that darling may be her husband or maybe the person she is with at that present time. So she says that her darling may find it hard to believe that she, that particular woman who is not loved by anybody, who is not regarded with dignity by anyone, had once lived a life of dignity. She was loved and cherished in that house. And what is that house? The house of her grandmother. You know that grandparents give unconditional love. They do not, the grandparents, when they give love to their grandchildren, the love is unconditional. They do not think twice about they should uh, whether they should give us something in return or not. But for grandparents, loving their grandchild is unconditional. So even the poet felt that this kind of love is something that she had only in her past life. What is her situation like today? Today she is devoid of love and pride. So, in her desperate search for love, she has lost her dignity and her pride. It felt to her that she would go knocking at strangers' doors asking for love because her husband, her family didn't give her the love that she wanted. And and the love that she tried to ask for from strangers, this love would not be given in a huge measure, but it would she could only get it in small measures. Small measures. So this is the poem, and in conclusion we can say that Kamala Das exposes her disillusionment at the institution of marriage. So when a woman is tied to a person in a very loveless marriage, she has to go through a lot of humiliation, she has to go through a lot of agony, and she has to feel a total sense of the lack of freedom. And that is something that the poet is talking about. And you see that she was Kamala Das, and here in the last few lines, she's asking, can you that lived in such a house and was proud and loved, I who have lost my way and beg now at strangers' doors to receive love, at least in small change? That means, can you believe that I, the person who is now without any love, had once found love in my grandmother's house? So, nostalgic poem, short poem, easy to understand. I hope you have understood it and you like it. If there is any doubt, then you can please put your questions in this particular forum. Ask any questions that you may have. Thank you.